Streaming audience that's just joining us now. We're glad that you can join us. And I'd like to introduce my friend Paul Ott, who is the director of the People of Peru project. And he's going to be speaking to us today about what his ministry does down there. Frontline ministry during this time of COVID and great needs in Peru. So I'd just like to pray with you. Father, thank you for calling Paul to this ministry. And as he was sharing with us last night, it's survived through the crisis that they're in down there with COVID and no food and all the problems. And he has seen miracle after miracle that you've kept the ministry alive. We pray that you'll bless him as he shares with us today, and that you will continue to guide him and his team as they work to help people in poverty in a faraway place. Amen.
Amen. Yes, I will. It is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I left this mask on for just 1 second because I wanted to tell you that I had flashbacks this morning when I was getting dressed, and I grabbed my little bandana mask to wear, and it reminded me of some time that I spent in India. 2 months on 2 different trips to India, where we did a Bible distribution project. And I'm not going to talk about India today, but I met the loveliest people in India as part of this ministry, and their faces were all covered. And I had thought, wow, I've never had to put a mask on before to go to church, or to have a veil or anything like that. And I just met some lovely, lovely people. And then when I was getting dressed this morning, I realized that I had brought my India pants that I purchased in India and my shoes. And the reason that was significant is that I went over there to do a Bible distribution project that I put together with a young Indian pastor. And we traveled on motorcycles 6,000 miles in India, from the southern tip all the way to the Himalayas. And we had Bibles drop shipped along the way, and then we took those Bibles in that Hindu country to these little fledgling groups of Christians that were studying, where a Bible cost 2 or 3 days' wages for these impoverished people. And so it was just a blessing, to hundreds and hundreds of people that received those Bibles who were already studying, little groups of people where they were tearing out sections, pages, so that you could have this and we'll trade it around later on. When you get done reading that, we'll trade you. And so to have their own Bible was just amazing. And you see my Bible here. I don't know if you can see it very closely, but it's got a plastic bag stuck to it. And it was so hot and so humid in southern India that the cover of my Bible was getting kind of sticky. And so one day I put it in this plastic bag because it kept collecting lint and things from the inside of my saddlebags on my motorcycle. And when I stopped the next time to preach, I was in this home, and there was all these young pastors from Spicer College, and I was supposed to be speaking to these young men, and I couldn't get my Bible out of the bag. And the lady of the house ran around until she found those old stub-nosed scissors like the kindergartners use, and I could have probably chewed it out faster, and I was trying to cut the bag off my Bible so that I could open it up and get to the Word. But I've never taken it off. I don't know that this Bible cover will ever catch on here in the United States, but I had lots and lots of remembrances this morning, and that mask started it. That's the only reason I'm mentioning this. And I have to tell you, when I got there, I wasn't really prepared to preach in churches. We were going to be traveling on motorcycles to these little fledgling villages, and I thought it was going to be pretty casual. When we got there, this young pastor said, "Oh man, you got to have some preaching clothes." I said, "I didn't bring anything. Everything we have to carry on a motorcycle." So he made me go buy these pants and these shoes. And I said, "Really? I need another pair of shoes? I don't need another pair of shoes." And he said, "Oh, brother, you can't go to church without nice shoes." And so we got to the church, and guess what? I had to take my shoes off and leave them on the front porch. Everywhere we went, every house we went to, I had to take my shoes off. I said, "Why'd you make me buy these shoes?" I had to take them off anyway. But what a blessed time that was. And we have seen a lot of fruit from the distribution of those 500 plus Bibles, and it's just been a real joy to watch that ministry grow. And I'll get back there again. I've got a little unfinished business there, but Anyway, that's my little India caveat that was very spontaneous this morning, but I just happened to think of it because I came in with this black mask on, and it reminded me of just some of the lovely, lovely people that I met there. And boy, I'll tell you, we think we have it tough. We think that worship can be difficult. We wrestle and get frustrated with technology and all kinds of stuff. And, I've worshiped with people in different parts of the world where we're sitting out in the dirt underneath a tree somewhere, and they've strung up one fluorescent light so you're not in the complete darkness, and people driving by and blowing dust up from the road, and, it's pretty crazy. But I would like to start this morning, here's the thing. People, I'll just be really transparent with you. When you've been involved in this kind of ministry for 20 years like I have, I don't know where to start. I could talk to you for hours about what God did to just help transition to when we were called into this ministry to transition out of business and to go into full-time ministry with no income, no bankroll, that's a whole story right there. Amazing what God did. And I will stop on that point just long enough to say that when God calls you to do something, and it may be right here in your home church, it may be right here in your own community, it may be in your own school, it may be the young people, it may be the shut-ins, it may be the homeless, who knows. Whatever it is, or it may be foreign missions, but whatever it is that God's called you to do, it is, and you can quote me, never about the money. It is never about the money. If God has called you to do something, He already has allocated the resources to do that. I was in business for a long time. I had a lot of employees. We have 14 employees down in Peru right now, workers in this organization. I have never asked anybody that was working for me on any level to do something without giving them the resources or the equipment to do it. Why would I do that? And God's a lot better manager than I am. And He will not call us to do anything for Him without those resources being allocated. Now, the truth is, you and I may not know where those resources are, but God's not having financial problems right now. The only financial problem He has is sometimes getting His resources out of our pockets, right? But trust me, it's never, ever about the money. And this whole thing is not about money today at all. This is about the amazing things that God wants to do through each one of us when we say yes to His calling. And fortunately, all of us have been called to do different things. And Sandy and I were living over north of Spokane, up in the mountains, had everything that I had worked for 42 years as a man, that I was striving to accomplish. And we had our acreage up there, and we had our horses. And my heart goes out to you today. I can tell you, we had to put one of our horses down one time, and that was traumatic enough for me that at that point I said, no more horses. I can't do this. I'm not cut out to lose a horse. It was very, very difficult. But you're young, and you've got a whole life ahead of you to still love on lots of horses. So you keep on going. But right now I'm out. I'm out of the horse business. So anyway, there's so much to tell, and I'm going to do a little bragging today, but I'm bragging about what God wants to do and what God has done, what He's accomplished, what we've done over the last 20 years through over 5,000 volunteers that have come to our project. And that's construction, and that's medical and dental, and that's evangelism and children's ministries. It's people that had expertise in crisis intervention and trauma therapy for our little girls. We have a crisis center for abandoned and abused kids, girls. Horrible, horrible things have happened to some of these children. I'll be telling you the brief versions of some of their stories here as we get going. And just amazing what God has done, where the resources have come, where the people have come, where the circumstances have threaded together that could only have happened through divine appointment. Only could happen. When sometimes there's a dot here and there's a dot here, and God wants to connect those dots, And there's this series of events that sometimes we're fortunate enough to be able to string together to say, wow, that's how we got from here to here. And if it hadn't been for this, and if it hadn't been for that, and it's just amazing what God has done down there through the people who have simply said yes. So I'll be doing a little bragging about that, and can tell you that we have our crisis center for the abandoned, abused girls. We have a free medical and dental and surgery center that has given care now to over 65,000 people. So I want to say this, tongue-in-cheek, not bad for a guy that had no income, right? When I showed up in Peru for the first time, after we closed down our businesses, after we sold everything we had to start this organization, it was me in a suitcase and a hotel room. And God just pulled all the people together and all the resources and put that vision together. And now, who would have thought, I would have never guessed, 20 years later we would have given that kind of medical care to a city out in the middle of the Amazon jungle. It's crazy. It's crazy. God loves to do crazy stuff, and He wants to do it through you. Sometimes He picks crazy people, and it's just good news. So Iquitos, Peru is the largest city on earth that has no roads that connect to it. So it's like an island. It's like being in Hawaii without the nice stuff. And you have to get in there by commercial flight. It's an hour-and-a-half flight from Lima, the coastal city, and either that or 4.5 days by boat on the Amazon River. So we're right at the headwaters of the Amazon. And it's a city now of 750,000 people. So a lot of people. When you leave Lima, you've landed in Lima at the longest arid coastline in the world. You fly up over the mountains, which is the longest mountain range in the world, the Andes Mountains. You land in the Amazon rainforest, which is Peru, Brazil, Colombia. So you're in the largest Amazon rainforest in the world, and then you're in the largest city in the world that has no roads that lead to it. So you've got all those Guinness Book of World Record things in one flight right there, and you can check those off your list. So I ended up there by going on a school-sponsored trip with my daughter from Upper Columbia Academy. And you talk about those dots being connected, where's the miracle? How did all this start? Was it when Pastor Dwayne McKee, some of you may remember him, was that when he decided to do an evangelistic series in Iquitos? Or was it when he called Upper Columbia and said, man, I'd love to have your students come along on their mission trip and support that series of meetings that we're going to do in the Coliseum? Was that the miracle? Or was it when they went to my oldest daughter, who was a gifted musician, and said, oh, Risha, you have to come along and sing at these meetings. You've got to bring your music down there to do these meetings. Or a lot of parents would agree with me when I say I think the real miracle was when my 16-year-old daughter said, Dad, you should come with me on a mission trip. Sometimes that could be the biggest miracle. And I went, and my life was so impacted by what I saw, the suffering, the people that were hopeless. And I thought, yeah, boy, I don't know what this means to me, but it was really, really unsettling. And oftentimes when God wants to move us from point A to point B, it starts with being unsettled. And so long story short, and I could spend more than our time today just telling you how all that happened, but I'll jump way ahead and say it took about 3.5, almost 4 years to get out of business and to be able to walk away from my commitments here or to fulfill my commitments here in the States and then be down there full time. So that's what happened in 2004. We purchased our first property there and began developing the organization to what it is today. And I'm going to tell you some of those stories as we go through. But I'd like to start this part of it now with just a little short video. It's about 1.5 minutes long. And I want you to really look, because I'm going to ask you a question or two when we get done. What did you see?
Smiles.
A lot of smiles. I don't know who said that because everybody's face is covered. You know, somebody told me the other day I look a lot better since we started wearing masks. I don't know, just I'm not sure what that. I said thank you, I think. A lot of smiles. These little kids, born and raised in this poverty, and of course you notice the filth and the primitive living conditions, and there's lack of sewage system down there, and very few homes have water connected to it. So you've got the human waste accumulates for about 9 months out of the year on these open sewage ditches, and then when the Amazon rises during the rainy season, then the water just creeps into that whole community and mixes with those open ditches. But they still wash clothes, and they still have to. The kids still swim and bathe. I've got hundreds of pictures of mothers that are out, kneeling down on the floating docks and washing clothes in that water, or washing their dishes, or brushing their teeth, or things like that. So the disease and the infant mortality and whatnot is quite high in communities like that. Now the whole city's not like that, but that's down in the lower part, probably 50, 60,000 people that live down there. And but so you see the poverty, but you see these children. And what's significant about what I'm going to talk about today, kind of the theme that goes through this, is that these children are happy, are they not? They're content. At least they were having a good time in that moment. But all of those kids that you saw, really, the first part, the ones that were running, are young enough that they have yet to lose hope. They're still innocent. They think life is fun and games. They have no idea, a lot of them, how difficult life is for their parents, and if they have a good meal or 2 or 3 good meals a week, how difficult it was for their parents to provide for that. And this dentist that you saw just temporarily out there working out in a village that we were in, and toward the end, the girl sitting in the canoe with the pink shirt, their brother and sister. The girl, both of them were living down in that community. These children ran right past where they used to live. The very first kids that I ever met in Peru 20 years ago. Very first. Living in poverty down there. And an amazing story of how God brought us together after a year. I was there, then I left and came back. And to be able to find them, and there was a specific reason. And again, you'll just have to invite me back so I can tell you that story. And how this young woman in the pink now is a child psychologist. She's our executive director. I put her through school starting at the age of 13. And her little brother is the dentist that you saw working. He's in charge of our dental program. Our dental clinic is open 5 days a week, doing free dentistry for impoverished families. And how God raised up those kids like Esther for such a time as this was amazing. And I could spend the whole time talking about just the two of them and their family and what they have meant to the organization and to literally now tens of thousands of people as a result of their character and as a result of their integrity, as a result of the work that their horribly impoverished parents did in their lives. Seventh-day Adventist young people worshiping in this tiny little rustic church in that community. And that's how we met, and it's just an amazing story for another time, I guess. But I wanted you to see the conditions, and I wanted you to see the children because they still have hope. I love this because this is for you and I. And I guess I need to turn this on now. I'm clicking my computer. There we go. Well, we don't want let's go into the display, into the presentation mode. Could be, there we go. So there we go. When we blend our lives with those in need, a fabric is woven from threads beyond this world. A pattern rich and vibrant eclipses every combination that we alone possess. You have to think about that a little bit, but when we blend our lives with the people in need, then things happen that are so beautiful they would have never been created had we not been involved. That's basically the translation of this. There is hope, and we're going to look at that this morning. See this little girl, how excited she is. That was at the other end of the country, up in Cusco. You know why she's so excited? I told her I'll be speaking at Port Townsend, and she just thought that was an amazing thing. These two little girls I met in the middle of the night. I'd been feeding street children in a local restaurant. It was about 12:30 at night, and I was walking through the plaza in the downtown area and heading to get a little motor car taxi to take me back to the Adventist hospital where I was staying. They had given me a room, and the little girl came and tugged on my shirt sleeve, and I turned around and she said, "Hey, mister, do you have some coins for me?" And I like to throw these kids off their game, because some of them are professional hustlers. They've been out on the street, third or fourth generation, taking advantage of tourists or people that may have resources. And so I like to try to throw them off their script or their game a little bit. And I said, "Hey, little girl, didn't your mother tell you that it's not polite to beg?" Because I wanted to see what she'd say. And she wagged her finger at me. She said, "I don't have a mother." Well, a lot of the parents will tell those children that. If you tell them you don't have parents, these foreigners will give you more money. And their job is to bring resources home every night. If they came back home with no food or with no money, they're in big trouble. So then mom and dad think, or mom, because there's usually no dad, think, they've just been goofing off and playing all day and not begging like they should be. So, they're in big trouble. They'll be punished if they come home with nothing. And so I said, "Oh, so didn't she tell you it's not, well, I have no mom," she says. And I thought, good answer, but let's probe that a little bit further. And I said, "Well, if you don't have a mom, then maybe you should go home and live with me." And she wagged her finger at me again, and she said, "Oh, no. The last thing my mom told me before she died was, don't go home with strangers." And I said, "Well, where do you live?" And I was with a young man who was actually translating for me at the time. This was on my second trip to Peru. I didn't speak any Spanish at all. This young man, when she said that, we both started to laugh. I thought, boy, this kid, I said to Freddie, I said, "This kid is witty, quick, sharp." And we were laughing kind of between the two of us, and we looked back down at her, and her little chin started to quiver, and she had tears starting to form in her eyes. And we realized that we had just laughed at this little girl who had told us that she indeed had lost her mom and that she indeed did live alone. And we said, "Well, where do you live? Who do you stay with?" And she said, "Here." I said, No. Where do you sleep at night? Where do you go home to? Where's your house?" And she looked around and she pointed at the bushes and the park benches and the things around the fountain there in the plaza. And she said, "Here." We said, "Well, with who? Are you alone?" And she said, "Yeah, alone." "You don't have any parents?" "No, no parents." No aunts and uncles?" No. And she finally said, "Well, I have a sister." And I thought, whew, that's a relief, because I was expecting a teenager, a young adult that's taking care of now a little sister, which is pretty common down there. And by this time, the kids that I had just finished feeding in this restaurant, they came running because they saw, I said I was going home, but now I was kneeling down in the middle of the plaza talking to somebody. So here they came to see what was going on. And of course, they all knew each other because they all grew up together out on the streets. And I said to one of the older boys, "Does she have a mom?" And the boy went, "Mm-mm." "But she has a sister." Yeah. "Well, where's the sister?" "I don't know. She's around here somewhere." So somebody went to run to find this older sister that I was expecting. A few minutes later, here came the older one. So their ages in that photo, these are our birth pictures right here, because it's the first pictures I have of them. Their ages were 8 and 10. So the 10-year-old was in charge of the 8-year-old, and they'd been living on the streets for 2 years. Well, long story short, I bribed them and said, "If you'd come back here tomorrow and meet me, I'll buy you some tennis shoes." So the next morning I came back with some Peruvians, and they took the girls back to the community where they had lived previously, and they interviewed the neighbors and asked what really happened, and it was absolutely true. Mom died 2 years previous. The kid's been living in the plaza ever since. And another very long story. whose last chapter has not been written. And that is that I got custody of them and adopted them as soon as I got there to Peru full time. I bought a house on that trip, moved a family into it. They took care of the kids for about a year and a half till I got there full time, then started the adoption process. So my deal with them was that they had to stay in Peru until they were finished at least with high school. So they both did. And when they were finished with high school about 9 years ago, they came to the States. And now they're both here, got married, have kids. So you know, parents, you know that the end of that story is not written yet. So I have some amazing grandchildren from these two right here. But was one of the hooks that God used to set me firmly in Peru. I'm relationally driven. The first year that I went back, I had promised this dentist and our psychologist that I would return. I came back a year later. Took me 10 days to find him. Amazing story. But it was them that brought me back the first time. The second trip, I met these guys. I promised them I would come back. And by that time, the snowball had started to grow. There was no turning back. So be careful, because God will use the sensitive parts of your life to help direct you exactly where He needs you to go. My only advice is just don't resist. And what an amazing, amazing circle of family and friends and relationships we have now as a result of this work there. But so God has blessed us with these two kids that we never anticipated. I had two older daughters that were already away in college, and who knew? Oops. Well, I was going to show you I had about 6 grandchildren pictures in there, and then I took them out because then I'd spend the whole time talking about grandkids. So I just had to leave one. So that's one of my grandbabies, my Peruvian girls. So there's hope for the people in the Amazon jungle when volunteer groups come and minister over and over and over again to these indigenous people. And like I said, we've had 5,000 volunteers over the last 20 years. Every one of them has gone to this village. They became friends. I became friends with the people in this village, like the chief of that tribe, Raphael, who just passed away about 2 years ago, but we had an amazing friendship, a bond that has gone back 20 years. These drums right here, my heart skipped a beat when I looked up and saw them this morning. This drum is smaller. This is one of two. I've got the other one at home. And these were made by a member of Raphael's family. This is rubber from the rubber trees that they had gleaned, and then they wrapped it around in the strings, and if you've ever seen how that works, and then they vulcanized it over a fire and whatnot, carved that out of a log, and they have a big set of the ceremonial drums similar to this in the village. And a few years before they died, Raphael gave me the big mallets with the big rubber balls on the end of them that he had been using in that village for decades to call the people together and to announce when visitors were coming and whatnot. And it's just a real honor to have that. But miracles happen when people consistently minister to those that need to hear. And finally, Raphael began to translate the Spanish Bible into the Bora language and into their dialect so that other members of the tribes could begin to read the scriptures in the Bora language. Ultimately, our organization built a church out there, and there's an Adventist group of people out of this tribe now that meet every Sabbath. And this little girl, I took the first picture of her when she was still in her mother's womb, so it wasn't an ultrasound, but I got a picture of her mom very pregnant. Next time I came out to the village, here was this mother holding this little tiny baby. I said, oh, that's who I took a picture of. So every time I went out to this village, I took pictures of her. And I said, I'm documenting your life. When you turn 15, which is a big deal in the Spanish culture, I'm going to give you the pictures. And so we've done that. And little girls like this get to grow up learning all about Jesus because the volunteers come. And they keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. Here she is now. She's living in our dormitory on our campus, studying in the university, and an amazing young woman who will continue to impact her own village in ways that would have never, ever happened before as she receives a university education. So God has strung all of these things together to work in His favor. It's a miracle when jungle villages have fresh, clean water for the very first time. We drilled a lot of wells. Infant mortality drops dramatically. Well, here my thing is stuck, so I guess I'll just, there we go, sorry. People who have been accustomed to drinking out of the dirty river for generations found it quite novel to have fresh, clean water coming out of the ground 50 miles out of the city up in the Amazon jungle. It's a miracle when God turns the frustration of an empty government schoolhouse into an opportunity to operate a Christian school deep in the jungle. We were actually out there digging the well when this picture was taken, and school wasn't in session, but these were just the children that were gathered around to watch the well drilling process. We really had about 25 children in that school. The man up there is our agricultural engineer that was working with the people on their rice and vegetable and fruit production out in the jungle. And when the government teacher wasn't showing up, he said, I'll teach the kids. So we had an Adventist teacher out there for 2 years in this little school because the government teacher was getting paid but never actually came. And see how God worked that out? Oh, yeah, it's a miracle when you get any volunteers after they see these pictures. Here's the big one. That snake was 21 feet long, weighed about 300 pounds. You see the size of it, bigger around than my thigh. And I was holding the head there, which is about the size of a college football. And when people see these pictures, I've had a lot of people say, well, I was thinking about volunteering. No, I'm not coming. Okay, well, we don't really have snakes that size in the city. You have to get out a ways. And, it's a miracle, and hope is planted when your daughter, Martha, the youngest one that I showed you at the beginning, who was rescued from the streets herself, tells a 13-year-old mother, quote, come to my Father's house and He'll take care of you. Think about that. What do we call that in the Christian vernacular? When somebody who was a street child, orphaned, tells another orphaned street child, come to my Father's house and He'll take care of you, we would call that her evangelism, yeah, her testimony, right? I mean, essentially, and I'll elaborate, and I know that Martha didn't say this, but essentially he was saying, listen, I was living on the streets. I had no mom and no dad, no financial support, doing whatever I had to do to survive. And this man found me, and he took me in, and he gave me everything I needed to live a good and healthy life. And if he did that for me, then I know he'll do it for you. That's the gospel in as clear and transparent of terms as I've ever heard it, apart from the scriptures themselves. And I've heard people say before, well, I don't really have a testimony. Well, I'm going to give you a really harsh news flash right now. If you're telling me that you don't have a testimony, then I'm telling you you're not a Christian. Ooh, that sounded harsh, didn't it? Now, we don't all have fantastic stories. We all didn't come out of the drug cartel or prostitution or, things like that. Didn't serve time in prison. But you and I were all dirty, helpless, lost street children. And the creator of this universe did something amazing so that our status would change. And the moment we realize even the smallest part of that, we have a testimony, an amazing testimony. So no matter where you came from, some of us were privileged to grow up in Christian homes where we never strayed that far away from the truth of the Scriptures. But the moment we realize on a personal level what Christ did for us and what that means in terms of our salvation and our future, what a testimony. And I just love that Martha said that based out of her own experience. And so based on that, when we had no money, no buildings, no program, no staff, a facility was born. Oh, there's Stephanie and Nicole. Oh, I need to tell you, Stephanie was 13 years old. She got pregnant. Her and her boyfriend lived over on the coast. The mother said, well, you're a big girl now. Have a happy life. So her and her barely older boyfriend came to Iquitos because his mom lived there. Everything went well. She, through the pregnancy, unbelievable. Her feet aren't even touching the floor in this picture, if you could see. She's a teeny tiny little thing. And she had the baby. And the night that Martha found them on the streets, they had this conversation, and this girl said, well, things were okay, and the baby was born, but then he started beating me, and he started beating my baby, and I feared for the life of my child. So she said, I ran away. And with the innocence in her voice and her eyes when she was telling me this story, she said, I can hear her voice now, it's really hard living on the streets with a baby. She's 13 years old. Unbelievable. But we didn't have a program. We had just purchased the land for our crisis center, but that was it. There was an old building on there that was like a pole barn with rusty tin roof and wooden walls, and it was leaning, and we thought, well, we'll leave it up when we ever get around to the construction, when we raise the money to do the building projects, at least we'll have a place to store the building materials and things like that. But it's going to come down. I mean, it's just an old building. And within that building was one section that the previous owners had kind of fixed up a little bit. There was actually a tile floor and a bathroom and a screen window and lights. And so they would go out to this beautiful property on the weekends, and because there was fruit trees and orchards, and they had done a soccer field. You got to have a soccer field if you're in South America, And their friends would go out there and they'd picnic and barbecue and stuff, and then somebody'd stay out there if they wanted to. They had this one little room in this building. That was quite nice. Anyway, long story short, she stayed with us for about 10 days at the headquarters facility. We didn't have a child care program. This was way back at the beginning. We were still building the organization. I had just, I had my own two girls that I was trying to adopt that were off the streets themselves, were not house trained. And it was really challenging. And the girls were saying, Dad, you got to help this girl. You got to help the guy. I said, I'm thinking, what can I do? This is not my area of expertise, And so long story short, we took her out to the Watchman family that was watching our property out there where this future girls' facility would be. And they just took her in and loved her and cared for her like their own daughter. And we fixed up that one little room. And I remember we put a bed out there, and a big bed and a big princess mosquito net over that bed. And I bought a table and a little tiny radio and a fan. And I remember when we took her out there, and I felt so bad. I thought, man, I can't believe I'm putting this kid in this woodshed, But, I just didn't have any other choice. She was the neediest child I've ever met in my life. I couldn't walk through a room without her physically jumping up and clinging to me. I mean, I couldn't, sometimes I'd go a different route through the facility so she wouldn't see me because I was trying to work, and she was just clinging to me all the time. And so I just knew that I was not prepared to be raising a third child with a baby. And so we took her out there, and I was apologetic, and I said, okay, but this is going to be nice. And the family had a girl that was about 19 who had a little special needs baby, and then there was two little boys, and it was a perfect setting. So I took her out there, and I remember saying, okay, this is going to be your room. And we took her down to this building and I opened the door, and she stood at the threshold, and she didn't step in. She just leaned forward and looked in like this. And she started to cry, and I thought, oh, I knew it, you know. And then I started feeling bad, and I said, oh, what's the matter, honey? It's going to be okay, you know. Everybody's trying to comfort her, and she said, is this all for me? And she walked in, and it was like a movie. She just walked around and touched everything and looked in the bathroom. She came back out. She said, I've never lived in a house that had a cement floor before. And that had tile. And she'd never been in a place with running water or electricity that had a bathroom. Nothing. And she was just blown away by this accommodation that we were embarrassed about. And that's what started our crisis center. We had, that's it today, part of it. Some of our kids. Then one by one, these children started coming. We had no program. We had no money. We had no staff. People kept bringing us kids. Finally, our vice president at the time said, Mr. Paul, you know, you're going to get in trouble. You're an American man. You're collecting children. You don't have permission from anybody to collect these children. You're going to get in trouble. I said, Julio, what are we supposed to do? These kids are coming to us. They don't have anywhere to live. They don't have parents. They don't have food. What are we supposed to do? I said, oh, you got to, you know. So we went down to the family court judge, and we approached it this way. We didn't want to get in trouble. So we said, if we were to have a child care facility, what do we need to do to get a license or permission or whatever? What do we need to do? She spent an hour, this judge, with this list. Unbelievable. And things move at a snail's pace there anyway, you know. And I mean, everything from seismic zone decals to food service and nutrition and medical care and psychologists and social workers, and the list just went on and on and on. And if you're going to have babies, oh, it's a whole other thing to take care of infants, you know. And just, we left there overwhelmed, and Julio says, we got to get rid of these kids. I said, we're not getting rid of these kids. What are we going to do with the kids? We're not getting rid of them. 1 week later to the day, there was a knock on my door. And I opened it, and there stood this judge, this lady judge. That's not a good sign. And there was a police officer and an officer of the court. And I thought, oh boy, you know, Paul's going to jail. just take me. And she came in, and when they came in, there were two girls behind her, and one of them had this little baby in her arms. I thought, what is going on? They came into our living room, and I went and got the vice president, and we sat down, and the judge pulled out these file folders from her briefcase, and she handed them to me, and I said, what's this? And she said, well, we want you to take these girls to your facility. I thought, it's a trap. I said, oh, no, we don't have a facility. I mean, we were just asking, what do we need to do in order to be, you know, and we're stumbling all over ourselves. And she just stood up and smiled at me and shook my hand and said, yeah, well, never mind. And they walked out and left those three with us. And I had told her, I said, you know, you told me specifically that if, you know, that we were going to have babies, that was a whole nother thing. And I said, that looks like a baby to me. You know, seven days old. Tall, skinny girl, this little tiny baby, and then this other short, tough-looking girl with a headband that looked like something out of a gang. What are we going to do? And people kept coming. We had 14 girls in that old building up front before we finally got our first dormitory finished. Never once did they complain. Never once did they say, are you kidding me? I'm living in here. When you give people a safe, nurturing, loving, Christ-filled environment, what is there to complain about? It was amazing. I could tell you so many stories of the lives that changed as a result of that. You know, people say, well, I don't know, I'd love to volunteer, but I don't have any skills. Can you play with kids? I have to tell you this story, and Giovanna came knocking at our door one morning, carrying baby Camila. And we brought her in, and it wasn't a morning, it was evening, it was Friday evening. All the staff had gone home except those of us that lived on the compound. And come in, what's going on? And I thought, oh man, why, these these young moms always bring their sick children to us after hours, when our nurse is gone and the pharmacy's closed. And I said, now what are we going to do? Have to get some medical attention probably, because that's usually why somebody shows up there. But when she came in and told us her story, it wasn't that at all. And I'll just give you some of the highlights that aren't very graphic. But when she was young, living out in the village, a long ways out in the jungle, a neighbor man violated her. And her parents knew, and nothing was done about it. And a few months later, it happened again. And she said to this man, why are you doing this? He said, well, because your dad did the same thing to my sister. So it was a revenge thing. And she knew, since nobody was coming to her defense, that probably was not going to end, and so she ran away. And got on a riverboat and went as far as she could, and showed up in a village where nobody knew her, and a family took her in. And the family that took her in was the local shaman priest, the witch doctor, and his teenage son. And then it was a foregone conclusion that the two of them would just be together, and so now here she was, essentially partnered, married to this young man who he and his father, their whole life was all about the shaman practices in the jungle, which are alive and well. And she got pregnant, and he didn't want a baby at that time, so they did a jungle abortion, which was strong medicine and a mechanical aspect to it, which left her in really bad shape physically. And then some time passed, and lo and behold, she got pregnant again, even though she was still hemorrhaging from this process that had happened quite some time before. So she had this baby Camila. And then the abuse got really bad. And here's a connect the dots story. So in another village nearby, we had our jungle facility where I showed you the teacher that was, and the well drilling and the agricultural program. Our watchman out in that jungle village name is Italo. And one day Italo was clearing brush, and a fertile ant snake bit him on the hand. One of the snake that causes the most deaths in all of South America. It's not the most poisonous, but pretty close. But it causes the most deaths because it's the most prevalent. So Italo got bit on the hand and was horribly sick. They thought he was going to die. And they're 50 miles away from the city, so they put him in this boat and they took him to the next jungle where there was medical attention. Who was the who? The shaman. And they do know some things about jungle medicine. I mean, you're in the Amazon jungle, some of the most powerful natural medicines and herbs and things that you spend a fortune for in the health food stores that grow like weeds there. So they do know some things about this, and certainly the snake bite. And so they were treating him for that, and he was so sick and so weak for so long that he was months in that village just recovering. During that time, he observed Giovanna being abused by this family. And when he finally had a moment, he went to find her when nobody else was around, and he gave her a piece of paper with the name of our organization on it in Iquitos, and he said, do you want to live like this the rest of your life? You're young, you're beautiful, you have this baby, and these people are horrible to you. You know, you don't need to live this way. And she said, where would I go? What would I do? I don't have not one nickel, for transportation or food or anything. How could I take care of my baby? And he said, I work for an organization that helps girls in your situation. And if you can just get there, I promise you, they'll take care of you. So she hatched up a plan with a neighbor who was sympathetic to her, who had a boat, a little pecky-peck, those little Briggs & Stratton motors with that long shaft that sticks out the back. Some of you have seen those. And when there was an opportunity and all of that family was out doing something else, she grabbed up her baby and a little bag of clothes, and away they went to the boat. And he took her hours downriver into Iquitos. And when she got there to the port, she'd never been there before, she started asking people, where is this? Where is this? You know, people, oh, muy lejos, they said, long ways, you know, all the way across the city. And eventually, it took her all day, but eventually she got there to our facility and knocked on the door. And she told us this story. And I was just overwhelmed like I always am. And I said, wow, okay, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take you out to our girls' facility. And by this time, we had our dormitories and whatnot. And it was quite nice. And I said, we're going to take you out there. And then on Monday, we'll bring you back into the office and we'll kind of do some of the legal work and get all the information we need and everything for you to be with us, if that's what you want to do. And you can study and you can, we'll help you raise your daughter and we'll get you some medical care. And so she was pretty excited about that, and we took her out there I remember on Friday evening. And I wasn't going to see her again until Monday. But by Sunday afternoon, I just couldn't stand it. I jumped on my motorcycle and I went out there. It was about 15 minutes, and I just had to see how they were doing. And I thought it was going to be one of those things where I say, wow, what did you notice the most? Let's have one of those aha moments, where they say, wow, I've never been in a place that had a bed before. I never slept on a real bed before. These fancy flush toilets, I've never had a place with electricity. I thought it was going to be something like that. And so when I got there, I said to her, and she just greeted me warmly, and I said to her, well, so what do you think? What impacted you the most here? What do you think? And she stood there and thought for a minute, and she said this, the spirit here is very different than the spirit of my home. I was not expecting that. I thought it was going to be about electricity or toilets or running water. And this girl, the biggest impact was being in the care of people who could give her hope through Jesus. And I'll never, ever forget that. And I could tell you such a long story about her, but eventually she felt confident, she was ready, she finished her education, they moved. Her mom, we had to reconnect them with her family who thought she was dead all these years because they didn't know what happened to her. She just disappeared one day. We got them reconnected, and by this time, the mom was in early stages of dementia. And Giovanna said, I want to spend some time with my mom so that she can know my daughter. So they went over, and then ultimately she ended up in Lima and worked there and was very successful. And after a few years, we always stayed in contact, and Facebook, for all of its downsides, it sure has kept us in contact with our kids. And one day she messaged me and she said, oh, Papa Paul, I hate to ask this, she said, because I don't like to do that, but she said, school, oops, what's happened here? I'm not advancing for some reason. What's that? Well, I hate it when that happens. Well, if you figure that out, just kick it over to the next picture. Let's see what we have there. So she said, I hate to ask you this, but school's getting ready to start, and I'm just between some jobs right now, and she'd never had trouble finding work before, very ambitious. There we go. And she said, I hate to ask you, but I really need to get Camila registered, and I'm out of time, and I just don't have all the money. And I thought, man, that's weird. First of all, she's never asked me for anything before, but secondly, it doesn't cost that much to put your kids in school. Now, there's thousands of children that don't go because even that little cost is beyond their parents. But she was in Lima and she'd been working, and I thought, that's a little weird, but I trusted her and we had a good relationship, and so I said, yeah, absolutely. And so I sent her some money, just wired it over there to her bank account, and thought, that's kind of odd because it doesn't really cost that much. She must really be desperate if she's asking me for help. And a few days later, on my Facebook Messenger, she sent me some pictures. And it was Camila, who was in about 5th grade by then. And she was standing there in her school uniform, ready, like the first day of school pictures. And I looked at that and I thought, that's that's not a public school uniform. So I zoomed it in, and there was this funny little logo on the side of her jumper, the uniform. And it was kind of weird because it looked like 3 flames going up. And Giovanna had left us, and she'd been gone for years, and I'd talked to her. She'd come to the airport to see me when I was traveling in and out. We'd stayed in contact. I had no idea that she'd been putting her daughter in the Adventist school all those years, which is very expensive. Some of you may relate to that. Very expensive. And so this young mom came to us in crisis from a shaman family, left with a truth that made her so committed to Christ and to Christian education that she was doing whatever it took in the big city of Lima, 11 million people, to keep her daughter in the Seventh-day Adventist school, which was costing her more than food, I can tell you that. And I was just blown away. I thought, man, nobody thinks a snake bite is a good idea. But that snake bite led to a connection with her, which led her to us, which ultimately got her reunited with her family and put in Adventist schools. And now they've moved back recently to, she lives right across the street from the orphanage that raised her. And I see her all the time. Matter of fact, I want to tell you this, and the reason I'm belaboring this story a little bit is that just this morning, right before I left the house, I got a message right here on my phone in my WhatsApp app. And it says, and it's all in Spanish for those of you that read it, but it said, "Happy Sabbath, Papito, Papa. Have a good Sabbath with Sabbath blessings. May God be with you and guide your path, your camino, your path." So that was from Giovanna this morning. And what a blessing. Do you think I ever feel like the hardship has been too much? Yeah, no. Now I know we're supposed to be finished at 12:15. Is that correct? Okay. So I only have about 45 more minutes. So no, there's so many. You can cut me off anytime here. There's so many stories. There they are. That was before they left. I'm sorry. I keep thinking I'm advancing this picture and I'm not. Okay. That was before they left. Miracles happen to other children who become victims of violence and abuse, like 13-year-old Ermelinda and her 7-year-old son, Marcos. Here she is today, happy and healthy and finishing her university education. And while her son flourishes in a home that's secure and filled with possibilities, there she is with her husband now and her new little baby. This is real current. This was when I was just down there 5 weeks ago. And Marcos, that's little Marcos in the background. You saw him at 7 days, and now there he is as a teenager. What a blessing. They live within walking distance of our girls' facility. We see them all the time. They're best friends. She's best friends with the director of our orphanage, who came to us as a 12-year-old abandoned child, and we put her through elementary school, high school, and then nursing school. And then she married one of our volunteers, Ryan Haberly. I don't know if any of you know him, but he's from Burlington area. He's been down there as a volunteer many, many times until he fell in love and married Rosanne, who was finishing up her nursing school. And now they're the directors of the very orphanage that raised her. So just a blessing. Here's Kayla, who was abandoned in the jungle at the age of 10. She lived on the streets of the city, taken in by a family until she had a baby by an adult member of that household. And of course, then her usefulness was finished. They didn't want her around then if she was going to have to take care of her own baby. But I've seen what happens in the life of the same little girl and her special needs baby when they were nurtured and protected and loved in a home where nothing was expected in return. By the grace of God and the supporters from distant lands, baby Kevin would never have to know his mother's pain. Here they are in their very own miracle house that was built by one of our volunteer groups. Oh, it could be considered a miracle when your pet toucan lives after flying through the ceiling fan. Hence that well-known saying, when your toucan hits the fan. You know, there's always another use for duct tape, is there not? Yeah. It made a good splint while the super glue was drying on his bill, and that bird lived a long and happy, healthy life with his prosthesis. It's a miracle when girls like Edith, who are poor and fatherless and hungry for an education and in need of a life-altering surgery, find the help that they need at your front door. What a privilege we had to offer children an education that at the same time direct them to a Father in heaven who will never abandon them. See, there's that school uniform. If I could zoom in on that, I could show you, but that's the Adventist logo up there on the... It's a miracle, and I've seen the transformation of a child who was locked in the back room of a house, being abused in every way for 3 months. They shaved her head so that she'd be too ashamed to run away in public. And as she spent time with those who would point her to Christ, her confidence, her trust, and her hair began to grow. It's a miracle when volunteer groups tell the story of Jesus to children who've never heard it before. And the seeds of the gospel are planted in the hearts of little girls and boys. There's hope for the malnourished babies when medical teams and hundreds of healthcare professionals from all over the U.S. join the fight against the needless death of impoverished people. And then the surgery teams come and change lives for those with no hope. There's Benji, our dentist from the slums of Berlin I showed you before. A woman's self-esteem and confidence is dramatically altered in 2.5 hours when she comes to our clinic with no teeth and then leaves with a beautiful smile. In mission work, no action is insignificant. No gesture of kindness is too small. Seeds are planted, sparks are lit in the lives of children who would have never, ever before dared to dream. Oh, I've also seen what happens when a Peruvian paints the American flag on your boat. Now all of the people up and down the Amazon think the U.S. only has 8 states. I've seen little girls like Jessica beg for an education and go to school for the very first day with all of the books and uniforms and supplies that she'll need for a shot at the future. I've seen the face of a little jungle girl like this who never before had brand new clothes for her birthday. 11-year-old Beja and her son Junior came to us for protective custody and now have a chance to grow up together with all the assistance and the love that the two of them can hold. Did you hear me? 11-year-old Beja. Look at that little guy. He was just a peanut when he got there. The kids had a little doll cradle that they played with, and we used it for Junior. And I've seen the smiles on faces of mothers and daughters who hadn't smiled because they suffered much for many years. When God moved in the hearts of hundreds of supporters of Positive Life Radio in Spokane, they provided the support for these two before we even knew that we needed it. Sarah didn't know the people of Spokane, but God had a place all picked out for her in Peru where she could learn all about Him. There they are today, my wife and Olga, and that's baby Sarah in the front. Her grandfather was too old and sick to work, so our plan was to allow him to die with dignity while in our care. But guess what? Right down your alley, a good diet, a wholesome environment, morning worship with the kids in our facility, And where we thought he was coming to die with us in dignity, he lived another 2 years healthy and strong until he finally succumbed to some deeper issues that he had, physically. But shortly before he died, just 2 weeks before he died, he called the office, or had somebody call the office, and he said, could Mr. Paul come out and talk to me? And I thought, that was odd. He'd been with us for 2 years. He'd never asked to talk to me. He was always friendly, but he never had asked to talk to me for anything. So I went out there, and he said, would it be okay if I got baptized? And I said, well, absolutely, of course, yes. If you want to be baptized, that would be wonderful. And then he said this, I just want to make sure that everything in my life is right with Jesus. Wow. And he had been the reason that his children, his granddaughter and daughter were in our facility. His life changed so dramatically that he went from he should have been in jail, should have been in prison. But instead, the Lord said, you know what, I think I'll just put him out there at Poppy's house with the kids. And I'm going to let him listen to worship every morning. And I'm going to let him be around people that will love him regardless of what his past was. And his daughter is actually the one that perpetuated that whole idea, because she's the one that forgave him and wanted a relationship with him even in spite of everything that had happened. And then here he was, ending his life knowing Jesus. So where is this hope? Is it in the well drilling projects, or the medical and dental clinics, or the crisis centers, or scholarships and building projects and vacation Bible schools? No. You have the hope to share. When you say yes to the needs of the suffering, relationships were built that opened the doors for people to meet Jesus, the only eternal hope of glory. Here's a quote that some of you have heard before. For as much as you have done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. I didn't say anything about COVID. I didn't say anything about the current conditions down there, but I can tell you that we lost over 4,000 people in our city and the surrounding jungle area. The hospitals collapsed, the pharmacies closed, they ran out of oxygen. 22 doctors died in the first COVID sweep through our city. It got so bad that they finally dug a mass grave out of town and had to put the bodies somewhere because there was nobody available to deal with it. They did a military and police lockdown. People were sequestered to their homes. There are tens of thousands of people who work today for food today. They have no reserves. I mean, if you don't work today to make a few dollars, you don't eat or you don't feed your family. Within days, there were people hanging white flags out of the front of their little shack houses indicating that they had no food, but they weren't allowed to go anywhere. And so our volunteers responded in amazing ways, and I put out a call through our Facebook page and how we reach out to our supporters. And within days, we had a substantial amount of money to send down specifically for emergency food. And they were standing in line, 4 lines, 4 blocks long to get to the bank to get money, because then the bank reduced its hours and then you couldn't get in to get your money out even if you had money to go buy food. And God worked it out. We got police escorts for our director to go directly to the head of the line because we have an assessor, because we're an official organization there, and she didn't have to wait in line for 2 days to get to the bank. She could go right to the front door. They would take her in and give her the resources because they knew that we were doing emergency food distribution. And we literally bought food by the ton. And our staff of 14 spent months doing food bags. And then we called every ministry, every humanitarian organization, every kid that had ever been through our program, every translator, every staff member who had ever worked for us, and said, come to us for food and give us a list of the people that you have access to who also need help. And we had hundreds of people that then distributed these food bags all over the city to their friends and neighbors and family members who were also suffering. So that's what happened. I just got back from Peru about a month ago, and I was supposed to be heading back down there this coming Thursday. But now my staff is throwing all kinds of red flags because this new variant from Brazil is crossing the border, and they've closed the border to Brazil and Europe. I can still get there, but if I get there, I may not get back anytime soon. I left last time, the first time around, I left last March, 24 hours before they closed the border. And I had other missionary friends that were stuck there for 3 months, which stuck there is not really the issue, but there was no medical care. So if any of them got sick, including their children, anybody, for any reason, malaria, dengue, COVID, anything, there was no medical care. The hospitals were closed down. So it was really, really desperate. And so right now, there are people in ICU. Our directors just had a friend that was in his late 30s, just died a couple days ago. They've got friends that had COVID before that are getting it now the second time. I've had it twice. Once I got it in March when I was down there, the very first wave that came through. And then I had it again. My first symptomatic day was Halloween. There must be some significance there. and I was really, really sick this last time. It's no joke for those of you who have not had it. Believe me, it's not a joke. It's not a flu. I mean, it is a flu, but you know what I mean. People try to pass it off as, you know. And of course, you and I know that the problem is that it's been so politicized that who knows what the truth is anymore. But skipping that whole topic, people are in desperate need. And so we've mobilized again. I gave the order a couple days ago for our director to start buying up as much food as they can for our warehouse. We're going to be the modern day Joseph story, and we'll have tons and tons of food that we'll start distributing here soon because it's going to lock down again, I'm sure, as this new wave sweeps through. And so that's how things are there. You know, our dental facility had been running the last 5 months, 5 days a week, you know, impoverished folks lined up. And, you know, it depends on what happens. You know, we may have to pause that too. But anyway, keep us in your prayers. And there's so much to do. There's so many stories to tell. And, you know, it's just been a blessing to be a part of it. The bragging that I do is really about the people who have stepped up to make this thing happen, and it's bragging about a God who in spite of everything the devil has done to destroy and ruin this world, still has love and compassion for us. And you know, we can't meet the needs of but a fraction of the people down there, just a fraction. I mean, there's 750,000 people in that city, and we've fed thousands of them, but not a fraction. But the one thing that we have in endless supply is the hope that we can give for the future. You know, the scripture says that in this life, in this world, there will be tribulation, but be of good courage because I have what? Overcome the world. And that's the hope that we can give. And our life may not be rosy, and some people may struggle till the very end, but you know what? We can reach out, we can do the best we can with the people in our sphere of influence and give that limitless supply of the hope that we have in Jesus. And, you know, that's my prayer today for you, for me, that God will inspire us, will encourage us, and will direct us to do whatever it is He's calling us to do. And again, that may be right here in your own community, it may be somewhere else in the world, but that's my prayer. And let's bow our heads. Father, I just want you to be the center of this presentation today. This isn't about what I've done. I couldn't have done any of this without your resources, without your guidance, without your leading. I'm just a worker bee along with everybody else that's involved in this amazing chain of events. I'd ask, Father, that you would be with those who are suffering today, both in Peru and here in the States and all these other countries. You've seen the heartache. Help that heartache and this misery to fuel a passion within us to give the good news of the gospel, that blessed hope, that eternal hope, to as many people as we possibly can. Keep us humble and keep us faithful, keep us safe, and give us a passion for whatever work it is that you have us to do. Fuel that to ways that in ways that we're uncomfortable if we're not responding to that call. Wake up our conscience, shake us out of our lethargy, help us to be generous with our resources. We know that we can't take it with us. We know that you've given us many, many blessings here in this country, and teach us what our responsibility is as we look around at people in need. And thank you for this church family and for the blessing of being here today for me. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.